Hello, everyone, and welcome to this virtual meetup. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. Excited to have a great discussion about, I think, an important topic, and it's one that every healthcare organization is dealing with, and that's really how do you leverage a data-first, patient-centric approach to multi-cloud solutions, and how do you make your healthcare organization more responsive? If we learned anything over the last, is it 3 months or is it 5 years? I'm not sure. I think it was 3 months, but it feels like 5 years. If we learned anything over that time period, what we learned is healthcare organizations are going to have to be nimble, whether it's another outbreak, whether it's another change, whether it's another pandemic, whatever it is that might come in the future. Healthcare organizations need to create an infrastructure that is responsive to that change. And I think that includes other things such as changes in regulatory actions or changes in the environment and the reimbursement. So hopefully today, as we discuss kind of this multi-cloud solutions and creating a nimble environment, you can get a lot of value from it. So if you are watching live, we will be live tweeting this, and you can check it out at the Transform HIT hashtag on Twitter. You can also use the HITSM hashtag, which is our healthcare IT community. So if you want to follow along there, you can see some of the interaction. And if you are watching live in the GoToWebinar, there is a Q&A section. So if you have any questions for our experts today, feel free to submit those questions and we'll do our best to incorporate them within the session. If we can't do it within the session, we'll definitely follow up after and do our best to answer it after the fact as well. All right, I think that's all the logistics. Let's get to the good stuff. So, we have a great panel here today of experts on this topic, and they have real experience. So, let's start off. We can have our panelists introduce themselves. Justin, or I should say, Dr. Collier. Would you please introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So Justin Collier, I'm a physician informatician and also a physical medicine and rehabilitation physician, dual boarded. Serve as one of the two chief healthcare advisors at Worldwide Technology and our industry practice manager for healthcare. So if you're not familiar with Worldwide Technology yet, I would encourage you to check out wwt.com and wwt.com/healthcare.
Awesome. Thanks for coming, Dr. Collier. And David, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is David Sarson. I'm the global lead for healthcare cloud and multi-cloud at Dell Technologies, and been working for the past 7+ years at Dell and putting together different cloud solutions for all companies in all industries. Really had some great experience in understanding what works, what doesn't, where the challenges are. And now I'm focused on the healthcare side of our business, which is one of our strongest at Dell. And I'm excited to be here. Thanks, John.
Yeah, well, I think Dell obviously has some deep expertise in this, and have been working on it for a lot of years. So I'm looking forward to hearing your insights, and also, of course, it's always great to have a physician's insight as well. So, let's start off with, I guess it could be a somewhat controversial question, but as I talk to all the CIOs or, these leaders of IT, CTOs in the industry, I often hear a lot of them be like, well, John, cloud and our even our in-house infrastructure is really a commodity. And I hear that and I'm like, is that true? And so maybe you could start us off, David, and is cloud and in-house infrastructure a commodity now?
The shorter answer is no. The longer answer is there are things within cloud and on-prem solutions that involve compute, network, and storage. So to that end, they're very, very simple. They're very easy to understand. I think where it goes is that tool set has evolved and continues to evolve. And the most important part to focus on are the workloads, the applications, and the data. And by understanding where those are within the applications and understanding your applications, you can then really understand where your workloads need to be sitting to be most efficient. Because really we're looking for efficiency and the value that is seen whether or not they're on-prem or off-prem. So I think that's the commodity is the compute network storage has been around for decades. But I think the way it's applied in the different iterations within, that's where the complexity or the challenge comes.
Well, and I think, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I would say I would definitely agree with that. And the analogy I would use is that it's not like utilities, right? It's not power, it's not natural gas. I mean, it's really more like if you think about the automobile industry, is that a commodity, an automobile? You gets you from point A to point B, but there's a lot of variation, a lot of differences, and a lot of it depends on the workload, right? So if you need to haul something big and heavy or tow something big and heavy, you probably are going to need a truck, right? And the type of truck that you pick is going to depend on the workload, right? If you need to haul a big family, two-door coupe is probably not going to get you there. You need to select the right vehicle for the workload that you've got to get done.
Well, and I think the other thing, as far as this commodity discussion, goes down to how much configurability there is. And, like if you buy natural gas, there's nothing to configure. So I love that example, right? Like that is a true commodity. You buy it and you use it, and there's really not a configuration. Whereas in a cloud or the IT infrastructure, whether it's storage or compute, there's a lot of configuration, and how you configure it determines the effectiveness. I think that's what you were talking about, Dave, right? As far as how efficient it is. What are the variables that make it not a commodity? Is it speed? Is it what are the things that really are influenced if it's configured wrong or right?
Yeah, I look at it similar to, I mean, taking this analogy is further on the transport piece. With the cloud is the Uber and the Lyfts of the world, right? Where you don't have a driver, you don't own the car, you don't own anything but going from A to B, and that's your end goal. I think there are some really big challenges in healthcare because most of the applications have been written for that three-tier architecture, sort of the old way of doing things. So as the transformation is taking place now, I think that's some of the things that can get compromised if customers are looking at the world, just how do we get this done? We're going to go all to the cloud, or we're going to go all to stay on-prem. I think it really gets into understanding those workloads, understanding where that data is needed and when. There's different types of data, right? So you have, maybe break it up into three would help this discussion, would be a large data sets around imaging is one sort of key area for VNA and PACS. And then EHR would be more low latency needs, more bedside assistance and administration. And then maybe the third could be a mix of the two, which would be more needed for R&D. And that gets into some of those new workloads around agile and artificial intelligence, maybe machine learning, that could use different sets of data, big, small, but then it needs to be analyzed and then released. So I'm not sure if that exactly answered the question, but it gets to kind of maybe a jumping point that we can take.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense because if you implement the same infrastructure as a commodity, to use the term we started with, for an EHR versus a research organization, you're gonna have lots of issues. And I think that's where the conversation is challenging, is because you have to understand what does the application need and then apply it properly. And so I guess that's, I think maybe Justin can chime in on this, is what happens when a leader treats it like a commodity? What is the result? Have you had any experiences where they're like, oh, I don't care about that? And like it seems, that seems like a bad strategy in my opinion.
Yeah, no, definitely I've run into that helping different health systems around the country. Really, we see the best practice moving toward that multi-cloud and hybrid cloud architecture. Right, you've got to figure out what are the things that can stay on-prem and which of the public cloud flavors are going to have the tools that you need to actually do the work. We see a lot of failures happen when everybody in an organization decides that they're going to go all in on just a single flavor, and then they find out that the tools that they needed to get the work done aren't in that particular flavor of public cloud. So definitely I would agree with what you're saying. And that's just an example.
Yeah, that's great. So I think it's interesting, David. If I were to classify your three categories, I'd say it's kind of the PACS archive, right? Imaging. It needs high storage, but it is kind of an archive. There's some subset that needs high availability, but there's a whole subset that is accessed almost never, right? But you need to store and proper it. That's kind of that first tier that you talked about. The second tier is your EHR applications, which need to be high availability, constantly updated, constantly accessed. You're not sure which data is going to be accessed. That's kind of that second tier. Then the third tier, it is interesting that you described as kind of a new tier, which I think it is, that new evolving tier of I need high processing power to crunch a bunch of data or to process through, I think we're getting at genomics data or research data, high volumes of data that's processed. What is the right approach for that, and where does it make sense to go to the cloud, and where does it make sense not to, across all of those three aspects?
Yeah, the real answer to that, as far as how to figure that out as a customer, is around the applications and the data. Sort of where are they needed and when. Radiologists, for example, can't wait to have images load. If that happens because all of the imaging is in the cloud, that can be a problem for those radiologists. There needs to be that ongoing update of data in the background. And one of the nice things, I think, of putting these solutions together, maybe back to the first question, which is, look, storage can be seen as a commodity, but storage at the right time with the time element added in there really becomes challenging, because what happens with the next week of patients that are coming in, you want to have all those files downloaded, otherwise it's going to take X number of hours to download those files. So that's some of those challenges when you say, what is the right environment? Part of it depends on who's using it. And that's what I'm finding most of the IT departments are learning. Instead of having the storage administrator only worry about 80% utilization and then buy more storage, they're starting to have to see a vision of what's being used, when it's being used. To your point, if many imaging files after a certain period of 60 to 90 days aren't needed anymore because the x-rays or the scans aren't needed, the patient has had his treatment and is over, but they still need to be recorded. I believe actually breast scans need to be kept for lifetime. So that storage kind of really is challenging with healthcare, but there's no need to leave it on great storage as far as like flash storage. You can move it around. And that migration is really what I'm finding a lot of those IT departments trying now to really get involved in, to understand where data is and where it needs to be.
And is that usually the application that determines whether you can do that, or are most people relying on the application to solve that problem, or are you implementing hardware solutions or other solutions like that, or what's the balance there? I mean, I know most healthcare IT software companies are working with vendors, as like Dell Technologies as well, but how are you seeing them really solving the problem?
Yeah, we're definitely in the top 70% of all of healthcare applications globally. What I mean by that is we're touching in some way the storage, the compute, and the network of the work that's being done in technology. So what we're finding hardware solutions that are sort of smart hardware, if you will, that have our software built into them, so that there can be dedupe, there can be redundancy that is removed, there can be better efficiencies around the flash storage and less speed within storage for some of those older files. And then we're working with the software vendors in developing solutions that are more holistic for a customer, so they don't need to worry about integrating it on their own shop floor, but we're able to do that before it gets out into the market, so it arrives ready to go, both from an imaging perspective as well as an EHR, as well as some of the R&D teams. I'm finding a lot of those are really growing quickly, and with that fast growth, they need the speed of the cloud, but the autonomy and the control of an on-prem environment.
Yeah, and I think we could talk about the research one maybe in a minute, but Justin, I think I
Yeah.
cut you off. You were ready to say something.
No, that's okay. Yeah, David covered it well.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, so maybe you can address then, Justin, kind of what are you seeing as people make these decisions? How do you see them making that decision between, do I go cloud, do I go multi-cloud, do I go public cloud? What's the process you see them going through in making that decision?
A lot of it has to do with organizational readiness, and that's something that I would caution every organization to think through. Are they really ready to do it, or is it just something that's become the thing to do, or are they just following a trend? Making sure that they've got the right skill set on their team up front to be able to manage that, understanding what the types of applications are. For example, is it maybe even a homegrown application that they're considering moving, and what would be the implications there? Security and compliance were already mentioned as absolutely key, and including that in the front end for your planning is a big component. Can't emphasize that enough. Too often that ends up being an afterthought, and that could be a major disaster. You want to ensure against data loss wherever you're going to put your data, right? You've got to be able to have your backups. You got to have backups in a smart way. Is the cloud your backup, or is the cloud your primary? Making that decision up front is pretty important as well. Trying to think here. And then app dependencies. You've got to look at that as well. So doing your dependency mapping, figuring out which apps rely on other apps and which workloads might cross multiple apps, or which workflows might cross multiple apps. Figuring all that out together is pretty important before you move anything. Otherwise, you can end up breaking something that's pretty mission critical accidentally.
Yeah, and I think to your point, we're becoming even more connected, push, drag, screaming to be able to create interoperability between systems legally and everything. So that is a major consideration. Can we connect these two systems, and how do we do it? And is it easier if it's on-prem or in cloud, or what is it? That's a great consideration. But I love the idea of organizational readiness. And maybe David could talk to, what should organizations be doing to make sure that they're ready? Because I think we think, okay, well, there is a current state where you're at and you're either ready or you're not, but there is, what can we do to make sure we're ready, a year from now when it explodes, and guess what, we're back to stay-at-home orders and remote work and telemedicine again. So what are some things that you would suggest, David, that to make sure your organization is ready, and kind of around the kind of overarching theme of this, of being responsive and available? What can organizations do to be ready?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is to have good partners, both from a partner channel and also from a manufacturing view, and making sure that there is depth, there is alignment, and there is integration that can be done. For example, we, in 2 weeks, put together at Dell an offsite corporation that needed their workers in what we're dealing with now with the pandemic to work from home. And we worked and got 200,000 of them out working from home in 2 weeks. And that takes a lot of preparation on both sides and trust from our customers and from Dell Technologies. And I think with WWT being the partner that they are for us and one of our best, we're able to have that reach and have that relationship with our customers, that there's a trust there, that we're not just there to sell systems, but we're there to actually help and better and keep the readiness for those customers for any organizational change that comes up. So I think that's one area that's very important. And then I think the other is to really understand your people. I know a lot of discussions around technology and a lot of discussions around new ideas, and the cloud is one of those that over the past 10 years that has really grown, which is wonderful. At the same time, we need to recognize that people are the key element in why things get done well and done right and quickly and efficiently and all those pieces. So I think that's the other piece that I've seen far too often, there being not an integrated view from a corporation to involve everyone, but more an edict from above or even below for that matter, but just a decision that isn't integrated with all teams. And it's honestly, it's how DevOps even started, development and operations. The guy that started that out he put those two ideas together, and that's why we have microcoding now, and why we have all of this really well done adventure of iterate, fail, and then finally succeed, but in a small level instead of waterfall. And I think that's what we need to embrace in all our corporate cultures, is that idea of really bringing everyone together from the people side and making sure that organizational readiness is alive and well, rather than just dictated from anyone.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it's definitely classic change management, right? You've got to have your people, processes, and technology aligned. And David, as you mentioned, executive sponsorship is absolutely critical. But if the executive is the only one that's on the bus, it's probably not going to get where it needs to go. Yeah.
That's interesting. Obviously we've done a lot of research in healthcare IT today about EHR and adoption and satisfaction, and one of the keys to a successful EHR implementation is the leadership. It's core to success, and going back to what you say, it's really core to success of any project is getting the executive leader on board. Although Justin's comment was really fascinating. I'm reminded of Drex DeFord, a former CIO, and I think many in the industry know him. He commented to me one time, he said, hey, if I bring the initiative as the CIO, that's an uphill battle, and it's going to be a real challenge for me to implement that. But if my people bring me something and then I get behind them, now we have a team, a collaboration, leadership approach. He said that is a much more successful model for me to be able to do a project, rather than, like you guys talked about, just an edict from above and people aren't bought in necessarily. So it was just fascinating that was his leadership style, was to incorporate them from the beginning, almost have it feel like it's their idea, or maybe it is their idea, to be able to lead the organization. So, powerful change management stuff with leadership. But Justin, maybe you could talk to more about your relationship with Dell Technologies. Even, how is that as a partner of Dell? How does that work, and how does that work for your customer, and how do you collaborate with them? And obviously we can talk about it in even selecting, is it multi-cloud, is it in on-premise, whatnot? What's your thoughts on that, and what's been the key to success, right, to be able to deliver something great for the customer?
Yeah, I think the top key to success, and David, you'd probably agree with this, is that when we go as partners into any account, our top concern is not what can we sell you, and David, you mentioned that earlier. It's what are the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and even a layer or two below that, what's the mission of the organization? Because if you do the right thing but in the wrong way, you still did the wrong thing. So understanding those two key things, what's the mission of the organization, what's the business outcome that needs to be achieved, then you back into how you do it. If that makes some sense. So starting with why is a pretty classic concept, but it applies to technology as well. And then our team, we have an amazing team, actually a team of teams, who are able really to break that down and understand it and work across silos to get to the right answers, to set out that roadmap of this is how we think we can get there together. Looking at the right technology pieces, but also helping with the people and process pieces, and in a lot of cases also providing training. Through our Advanced Technology Center, which is a fantastic customer and partner resource that we have built. It's multiple data centers and also a vendor, or not vendor neutral, carrier neutral facility. We have an additional sort of colo, if you will, where we have access to all the public clouds. We can do all the testing that you would need, and not just with Dell and VMware and Dell Technologies stuff, but with everybody else's stuff as well. So we can really find what's going to work for a particular customer's environment in the grand scheme of things. What things need to be replaced? What things can you keep to maintain that return on the investment that's already been made in order to make them successful, and then make sure that the team that is on the ground at the customer gets the training that they need. We want to teach to fish, not just fish for you, if that makes some sense.
Yeah. No, it's great. I'm not sure everyone does the same approach you described, but I think there is a growing, and David maybe could tell me if this is true or not, but it feels like there's a growing demand from the end users that you are going to collaborate. I think they always say the cooperation, right? Cooperation and competition, but it feels like that's just a feature of technology today that I'm expecting my vendors to work together. Is that what you're seeing as well?
It depends on the sales teams that you're talking to would be the
Okay.
true answer is the way I see it. And it reminds me of the book by Orwell, The Animal Farm, where all animals are created equal and some animals are a little more equal than others. And that was written in later as the one of the animals moved into the house. And I think it's the same thing with products, which is everyone has many, many products. Some are more equal than others. And I think the sales teams that are now being very, very successful at Dell in healthcare, partnering with WWT, I think when the partnerships happen and the identification of those top products that Dell has, it helps the customers save time by defining what really does work and what is efficient and valuable, rather than just, oh, we do that too. And that's something, I mean, I think we're now in 22 of the upper right-hand quadrant with Gartner, with Dell products. And it's an honor to work for an organization that has that many there. But I think being a leader in that space, in all those spaces, helps in defining the areas that we're really, really good at. And there are some that we're not so good at. And that's okay too, if people want to have a consistent one vendor to go to or have volume discounts. There's a whole number of things that can happen with one vendor versus multiple and all those pieces. But most importantly, I think it's being able to have those types of solutions ready and knowing which ones are right for the customer and the right application, right space, and ones where we need to, as salespeople, and it's hard for us to do this, but to say no, that isn't where we are going to shine the best.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what every healthcare leader is dealing with, is knowing who shines best in which one. And, I appreciate you sharing about the partner stuff. I didn't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. I'm sure there's a lot more to discuss there. But let's shift gears back to some of the cloud stuff. And, for me, I look at it and I say, well, how do you create a responsive infrastructure, but it also has to be reliable. It also has to be timely. It has to, as we talked about before. I think that's particularly true for like tier 0 and tier 1 applications. And I think there's still a fear around moving those applications to a multi-cloud environment. So, how do you move those mission critical applications into that multi-cloud environment and still maintain the service levels? Is that possible, or what are you seeing in that regard? Maybe David, you can hit it, and then Justin.
Yeah, very carefully is the answer that springs to mind. And the reason I say that is in healthcare in particular, I've done a lot of work in the finance world, in the retail world, and helped companies build multi-million-dollar clouds that are still in effect and efficient and working. But there's a couple of things in healthcare, and the biggest one that is why we're, as an industry, catching up to those is we're all developed, most of the healthcare software has been developed on a 3-tier environment. And with that, not the only, but the main reason to go to the cloud is to get out of the data center business and just shift your VMs to the cloud. And then you lay on the software that you're using out there, and you deal with being as good as your network is, because that's really the access points that you have into those clouds. And that's a challenge because, as I mentioned with DevOps, that world hasn't been embraced yet. A lot of companies are changing. I'm not saying it's not happening, but it's not changing as quickly as in other industries. So those types of challenges make it difficult to go to the cloud and utilize all of that the cloud offers, which deals with the application efficiency, the speed and change. All of those areas make it much more challenging because we usually use in healthcare off-the-shelf applications that when we go to the cloud, we'd be using VMs in the hyperscalers, that's really what we'd end up doing, what we're doing to say we're in the cloud, and then we get an OpEx bill, and that's what we say we're successful with. So that's changing. Most importantly, as it changes, that speed will come back. But I think for now, know exactly what applications you move into the cloud and why, and then be able to move them efficiently and make sure they still work when they're there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it is, I heard the end talking about the key is identifying the application and really taking a strategic approach. It feels like is the challenge.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. So, let's see what else we have. And definitely, if you're watching the live, if you have any questions for our experts, you can definitely submit them in the GoToWebinar panel. So go ahead and submit those questions, and we're happy to incorporate them as well. I think there's another topic I'd love to talk about, and that's really what role does data tiering play in constructing your multi-cloud environment? And so, how are you seeing organizations approach that?
Yeah, so I'll throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in that, David, before you jump in, and that's that more and more we're seeing data tiering, at least in the healthcare sector and many others, become a dynamic rather than a static sort of tiering or level of need. What's cold today may be warm or hot tomorrow in terms of the level of need and how ready it has to be accessed. So moving toward systems that can allow you that dynamic flexibility is pretty important.
Great, David?
Absolutely. And the tiering aspect, it's challenging even on-prem, right? Where you're trying to figure out what applications need what data when. I think this is just another step in that direction of expanding out from your on-premise solution to then a cloud. And how do you deal with that data? Where is it needed? It definitely goes back to the application again. Where is the application? When is it needed? Where is the presentation layer? And how is that presentation layer going to affect that data and the use of it? I think the key that I'm seeing, I think it was about 7 years ago, people used to ask, how virtualized are you? And that percentage was an important number for people to get an understanding, which is why VMware has done so well for Dell Technologies as a company. I think the new question that I'm hearing, and I think it's a valid one, is how automated are you? And it gets sort of to that dynamic question of how can I know when I need data and when I need it? And a lot of times that's the biggest challenge ever. And so by putting data lakes together with some of our technologies, using third parties, many of our partners that we use to integrate a full solution gives that complete universe of data that then can be used in that dynamic fashion that Dr. Collier was saying is how can it be prefetched almost and brought in before customers even think they need it.
Do you have some examples, we don't think we need specific organizations or anything, but of where you've seen where they've planned ahead for those type of situations and it's paid off, right? Or even where they built up an infrastructure. I heard a great example of a research organization, and going to your automation point, they said, we get research requests all the time, and they need to expand their capacity to be able to do some research, and then they need to be able to downgrade it because they only need it for this 3-month period or 1-month period. And so they used some virtualization technologies and literally automated the whole process. The request would come in electronically from the research organization. They'd evaluate it. It would provision all of the resources to the research organization. They would use it, and it was all done in this amazing automated fashion, which was awesome because when you think about how did this work in the past? Okay, they'd make a request, you'd order some machines, you'd have to implement it. It's like, I think that's a great example of the automation I think that you're talking about, obviously applied to the research. Are there any other examples you've seen, either of you? David, maybe you can start.
Yeah, tons. The one that comes to mind, I have tons of others that I'll get through if anybody's interested at some point, but the one that comes to mind is around a database, about a 2 terabyte database that was being duplicated internally on an on-prem environment, and it was duplicated about 30 times. It was a PeopleSoft database, actually, if I remember right. And then there was a couple of folks that needed to do some sort of slicing of that data, and they pushed it out into the cloud and used some of the algorithms there and some of the compute power that was there to use the slicing of that data. And it ended up being about 40 to 50 terabytes of duplicate data everywhere. There's a couple things with that. Justin mentioned security at one point, and that's one issue, which is huge. And then the other, just around that type of size, is very unmanageable. And so some of our solutions that we have deal with the ability to get a gold standard of that database and then have the metadata, the pointers back to it, which you can use in a database test or environment where you're doing that research. So that would be one area. By using technology, you're saving a vast amount, about 90% of the storage there, but you're still giving the flexibility and the availability of that data to all of your work groups that need it. That's sort of one example of just a small one that really where that technology, both in an on-premise cloud and a public cloud, you're able to use that, that data in a way that is much, much more efficient than just sort of doing one computer, one laptop, put it on your hard drive and work it.
Yes, I can give you a couple of case examples, but definitely agree that the importance of automated deduplication is huge, just in terms of what you're storing, and potentially in terms of your egress fees too, if that storage is in the cloud. So making sure that you're keeping the right number of redundant copies, but not continuously reduplicating them, is a pretty key piece. A great example would be there's a very large cancer center that we work with quite a bit. You won't name any names, but they had tried quite a bit with on-prem compute resources for AI machine learning. The challenge is they all wanted to use the same hardware, and so there became challenges with who gets it when and for how long and how much of the resource are they going to use. But the advantage to having on-prem as well as multi-cloud enabled some of that to be bursted out to the cloud when it was for specific workloads that could be managed well that way. And by keeping the storage on-prem or in a co-location facility, you're able to also manage your data sovereignty, right? So you've got control of the data 100% of the time. You're leveraging the cloud for the right workloads in a managed way that you can scale up and scale down and have some self-service around.
I mean, it feels like this is the only way forward, like the ability to scale up and scale down, because it's just really hard to predict what the needs are going to be, and I think that we have to build that function. Although I think it also brings up the question, is it kind of crazy that we're talking about multi-cloud and scaling to the cloud, kind of amidst this, current environment? Or is this an important discussion that really will help healthcare organizations that are dealing with a lot of challenges? What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, no, I think it enables a degree of nimbleness, and potentially done well, it can enable a degree of speed that you can't necessarily get on-prem. So when you've got an emergency that you've got to deal with, you've got something like COVID-19, and all of a sudden you have a ton of remote workers that need access to their Horizon VDI desktops. Being able to leverage the cloud to deliver that in a quick and nimble way, that's a massive advantage. Definitely, I think even in the midst of this, that has been something that has really shown well and has really yielded great results for the companies that have needed to leverage it.
Yeah, and I think embracing that value and that efficiency that Justin was talking about, I think it gives the companies that are challenged with those issues, whatever they are, whether it's COVID-19 or COVID-22 or whatever comes next, that ability to have flexibility when those challenges come, give the companies that have that forethought the ability to quickly change and really effectively save their organizations an immense amount of time and money, but more importantly, give the workers the ability to keep doing what they do so well.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, though, too, that always has to be part of the cloud discussion is a given organization's appetite for operational expense versus capital expense. And that's always a piece of the equation. There certainly are reasons why some organizations prefer capital expense over operational expense, but knowing that cloud is going to be much more operational expense heavy when you go with that strategy is an important consideration up front. But it definitely plays into these types of decisions as well.
And it feels like that financial one, operational expense versus ongoing, et cetera, like that feels like it's going to become even more important as we see many healthcare organizations suffering financially from this because of all the elective procedures that are gone. And so I think, it's interesting. We talk about availability, we talk about, redundancy, we talk about security, but at the end of the day, there's all these financial implications as well that are going to be at the forefront of all these discussions. But I think there's an interesting point, and I'd say one of the biggest lessons I've learned from this current environment is that those organizations that prepared were the ones that failed, that were able to execute the best amidst the crisis. So it was interesting, like once the pandemic hit, the other crises hit, if you hadn't prepared before, then you were put even further behind. And so I think that's a lesson probably for all of us as we look at what we do, is say, what can we do to prepare? Which is, why I think, I asked David the question, what else can they do to prepare? Any other thoughts on what people should be doing, Justin or David, on, to make sure that, hey, we're prepared now for whatever comes in the future, because challenges are not going to stop.
Yeah, no, business continuity planning is absolutely critical for any organization, but especially for healthcare. I think to your point, the ones that had good plans in place, even if they weren't necessarily for a pandemic, but had good, robust plans for a variety of other potential disasters and issues, really were very well served. I think there probably is also something to be said for having the right partners, although that probably sounds like a huge plug, but having partners who are willing, able, and capable of truly diving in and helping you to solve those big problems when you need it is vital, because you can't prepare for all possible scenarios because you don't know what you don't know.
Well, and I think it's true when they were rolling out the virtual clinics in convention centers. I think we saw that in particular, that the partners really mattered, because there was no way the hospital IT organization was going to be able to roll it out, let alone, something David knows well is getting the devices that you need to be able to do that as well. So that's really great. Yep. So David, oh. Great. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the other lesson I've seen, is that there were some really exceptional organizations that bent over backwards to do the right thing, even, not even, going back to kind of the process we talked about. It was, what do you need and how can we help you achieve that? So that's awesome. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. So David, you want to maybe give us some final thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Real pleasure chatting with everyone. Please head over to delltechnologies.com/healthcare for any more information there. Also, our partners at wwt.com, they have a ton of information on healthcare. Dr. Collier and I are available for any comments. And John, thanks so much for putting this together. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for your insights. And I think that, the message I take away from this is be prepared, be nimble, and get ready for whatever comes in the future, and you'll be a better organization for it. So thanks so much for doing this, and thanks everyone for watching live. Sorry for a little bit of tech issues in the middle for me, but I appreciate your kindness amidst everything that's happening, especially internet-wise. Good luck to those internet providers. But thanks to everyone, and be sure to check out the Transform HIT hashtag, where you'll see all the live tweeting. You can also check out all the great content at healthcareittoday.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.